Ancient DNA unveils disparate fates of Ice Age hunter-gatherers in Europe. In the 1800s, archaeologists began reconstructing the deep history of Europe from bones of ancient hunter-gatherers and the iconic art they left behind, like the cave paintings, the fertility figurines, and the Lion Man statues. And over the past decade, geneticists have added a new dimension to the history by extracting DNA from teeth and bones. And now, in a pair of studies, researchers have produced the most robust analysis yet of genetic records from prehistoric Europe, looking at DNA gleaned from the remains of 357 ancient Europeans. Researchers discovered that several waves of hunter-gatherers migrated into Europe. The studies identified at least 8 populations, some more genetically distinct from each other than modern-day Europeans and Asians. They coexisted in Europe for thousands of years, apparently trading tools and sharing cultures. Some groups survived the Ice Age, while others vanished, perhaps wiped out by other groups. We are finally understanding the dynamics of European hunter-gatherers, said Vanessa Villabald-Mucco, paleogeneticist at Max Planck's Institute. The new genetic analysis suggests that when farmers arrived in Europe about 8,000 years ago, they encountered the descendants of this long history with light-skinned, dark-eyed people to the east and possibly dark-skinned, blue-eyed people to the west. Dr. Villabald-Mucco and her colleagues gave these people a list of new names that can be as hard to memorize as the kingdoms of Westeros: the Furnol, the Vestonich, the Goyet, the Villabruna, the Oberkassel, and the Sidalkino, among others. But scientists are only just beginning to understand how so many different groups emerged 45,000 to 5,000 years ago. I didn't expect these amounts of replacements and changes in ancestry, said Carles Fox, director of National Science Museum Barcelona, author of one of the new papers. He said, we lack still an understanding of why these movements were triggered and what happened here, why it happened. It's very strange, he said. Now, modern humans arose in Africa and expanded to other continents about 60,000 years ago. And last year, archaeologists reported what might be the oldest evidence of those humans reaching Europe, a set of 54,000-year-old teeth in a French cave. When these groups arrived in Europe, Neanderthals had already been living across the continent for more than 100,000 years. The Neanderthals disappeared about 40,000 years ago, perhaps because modern humans outcompeted them with superior tools. But the oldest DNA of modern humans in Europe, dating back 45,000 years, undermines such a simple story. It comes from people who belong to the lost branch of the human family tree. Their ancestors were part of the expansion out of Africa, but they split off on their own before the ancestors of living Europeans and Asians split apart. These early Europeans have almost no genetic link to younger remains of hunter-gatherers. It appears that the first modern humans in Europe may have disappeared along with the Neanderthals, as said Cosimo Post, a paleogeneticist at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and an author of the 2 papers published. He says it's actually quite interesting that the very first modern humans also have a very hard time to actually survive. Before the advent of ancient DNA analysis, archaeologists would give names to cultures based on the styles of the things they made. The oldest modern human culture in Europe is known as the Aurignacians, names for the continent's oldest figurative cave paintings and sculptures. About 33,000 years ago, as the climate turned cold, a new culture called the Gravettian rose across Europe. Gravettian hunters made spears to kill woolly mammoths and other big game. They also made so-called Venus figurines that might have represented fertility. Dr. Post and his colleagues found DNA in Gravettian remains scattered across Europe. The scientists had expected all of the individuals to have come from the same genetic population, but instead found 2 distinct groups, one in France and Spain, the other in Italy and Czech Republic and Germany. They were very distinct, and that's why a very big surprise to us because they practice the same archaeological culture, said Dr. Post. Dr. Post and his colleagues named the Western population the Fournol people and found a genetic link between this group and 35,000-year-old Aurignacian remains in Belgium. They called the eastern group Vistonich and discovered that they share an ancestry with 34,000-year-old hunter-gatherers who lived in Russia. The genetic gulf led Dr. Post and his colleagues to argue that the Fournol and Vostinoch belonged to two waves that migrated into Europe separately. After they arrived, they lived for several thousand years, sharing the Gravitian culture, but remained genetically distinct, he said. This result is, in my opinion, groundbreaking, said Anaïs Louisa Vignol, archaeologist, University of Paris. Dr. Vignol said the archaeologists could now investigate the kind of cultural contacts these two populations had. It's clear from the new study that they were not isolated entirely from each other. In Belgium, the scientists found 30,000-year-old remains with a mix of Fournol and Vistonich ancestry. Jürger Richter, archaeologist at University of Cologne, suggested that these sporadic contacts between the two people might have shared colonial ideas, cultural ideas, and artifacts like fertility figuring. I'm absolutely not surprised, he said, of the new findings. About 26,000 years ago, the two groups faced a new threat to their survival, an advancing wall of glaciers. During the Ice Age, from 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, European hunter-gatherers were shut out of much of the continent, surviving only in southern refuges. Dr. Villalba Muco and her colleagues shed light on the refuge of the Iberian Peninsula at Spain, the region now occupied by Spain and Portugal, by studying DNA in the teeth of a 23-year-old man found in a cave in southern Spain. His DNA revealed that he belonged to the Fournol people who lived in Iberia before the Ice Age. The researchers also found genetic markers linking him to a 45,000-year-old skeleton discovered in Bulgaria. When the glaciers retreated, some descendants of the Fournol continued living in Iberia, but others expanded north as a new population. It really seems like a peopling of Europe after the last glacial maximum, he said. The Vistonich, by contrast, did not survive the Ice Age. When the glaciers were at their most expansive, the Vistonich may have endured for a time in Italy, but Dr. Post and colleagues found no Vistonich ancestry in Europeans after the Ice Age. Instead, they discovered a population of hunter-gatherers that appeared to have expanded from the Balkans, known as the Villa Bruna, and they moved into Italy and replaced the Vistonich. For several thousand years, the Villa Bruna were limited to southern Europe. Then, 14,000 years ago, they crossed the Alps and encountered the Goyet people in the north. A new population emerged, its ancestry 3 parts Villa Bruna and 1 part Goyet. And this new people, which Dr. Post and colleagues called Oberkassel, expanded across much of Europe, replacing the Goyet population. Dr. Post speculates that another climate shift could explain this new wave. About 14,000 years ago, a pulse of strong warming produced forests across much of Europe. The Oberkassel people may have been better at hunting in forests, whereas the Goyet retreated with the shrinking steppes. To the east, the Oberkassel ran into a new group of hunter-gatherers who probably arrived from Russia. The scientists named this group descendants who lived in Ukraine and surrounding regions the Sidelkino. But in Iberia, there were no great sweeps of newcomers replacing older people. The Iberians after the Ice Age still carried a great deal of ancestry from Fournol people who arrived there thousands of years before the glaciers advanced. The Sidelkino people on the east had genes associated with dark eyes and light skin. The Oberkassel in the west, in contrast, probably had blue eyes and may have had dark skin, although it's harder to be sure if their appearance than the Sidelkino. Now, Dr. Orlando said that every continent will likely have its own history of hunter-gatherer migrations. Researchers were able to plumb Europe's history in such a great detail because they could take advantage of 150 years worth of remains that have been stored in museums there. But he predicted that scientists won't have to dig up a lot of new skeletons on other continents to reconstruct their genetic histories. That's because it's now possible to extract human DNA from cave sediments rather than searching for bones and teeth. Dr. Orlando said we cannot develop a Eurocentric vision of the past. And this is on New York Times by Carl Zimmer. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.